Hello, I'm Debbie Kay with the League of Women Voters of Portland, and you are watching Video Voters Guide. We are with MetroEast Community Media to talk with candidates running in the November 2016 general election. With me today is David W. Walker, running for U.S. Congress from District 3. Thanks for coming today, David.
Thank you very much.
Let's get right to it. What do you think an improved tax system should look like for this country?
I think that we should look at different areas as opposed to income. I think the discussion over income puts people in camps. I think an easy tax solution would be a 0.25% transaction tax on all financial equity trades, bonds and equities. A 0.25% transaction tax would generate $500 billion, and it would draw money from the areas of our economy that put the most risk in our economy, which is finance and computer-driven trades in that area. With that $500 billion, I would propose cutting it up into thirds. A third of it would go to fund the minimum wage increase of $15 a national minimum wage, kind of in a way of an earned income credit. A 0.25% transaction tax on all trades could cover minimum wage for everyone. I'm all for higher workers and worker wages, but unfortunately small businesses can ill afford it. So I would propose having that revenue come from finance, and that could well afford it. And the other 2/3, 1/3 I would put towards the deficit of our country, and the other third as loans to small businesses. I was just reading a note on the Federal Reserve, how the amount of loans to small businesses continues to dry up. And so unfortunately our banks and financial institutions no longer put money into the real economy, and that's my goal.
Interesting. What, moving to a different topic.
Sure.
What do you think Congress can do to deal with climate change?
I think the challenge in our country in Congress is particularly the Republicans and the Democrats. So I think it's very, very important for all voters to start to stand together, united as people, and no longer vote for either a Republican or Democrat candidates for any office any longer. I've come to the conclusion, knocking on 50 to 40 doors per day, that regular people are no longer represented by these two organizations. So if we were going to have an effective discussion on climate change and pollution, environmental matters, it's important to have representatives in our Congress who represent the people and the interests of the people. It's very clear in Oregon and across the country that neither the Republicans or the Democrats represent the greater interest of any constituency any longer. For example, my opponent, Mr. Blumenauer, who talks a green game, is the #1 polluter in the Willamette River, is a big donator to him, PGE. So I'm afraid that most Republican and Democrat representatives listen to the donors who bring $100,000 bills to the table and let that guide their actions, as opposed to the welfare of businesses and people throughout.
Interesting. How you've talked a little bit about what I will characterize here as polarization, Democrats and Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
How would you reduce polarization in Congress so problems can actually be solved?
Well, in my estimation, the United States, I'm a healthcare provider, and I'm concerned, as a nurse practitioner, I'm concerned with individuals, but my concern is that the United States is civically, nationally, gravely ill. And two organizations that are at odds with the health of our country are the Republicans and the Democrats. So I would call on every citizen to no longer vote for either of these two parties for any office. Anyone else, let's say for president, we have two real candidates, and those are Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, and Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate. So if Americans would start voting for people who are interested in representing them, not corporations or banks or whoever has a $100,000 bill, then we would get an answer and solutions. The Republicans and the Democrats are invested in not delivering solutions to the people, and unfortunately America is in a very, very grave state, and we have two organizations that are at odds with the aspirations of the people.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about gun safety. An October poll right now from CBS News and the New York Times found that 92% of Americans, including 87% of Republicans, favor background checks for all gun buyers. What is your feeling about this? What's your stance? Would you work to support passage of more comprehensive federal gun safety laws?
No. My feeling is that gun laws are best left to the states. Oregon's gun laws are currently satisfactory in my regard. If a state or a municipality decides that it wants to change the gun laws, that's up to the states or municipalities. I'm really opposed to federal regulation because, once again, more often than not, those federal regulations serve constituencies that are not in line with the people's interest.
Okay. If elected, what would be your top priorities during the next session of Congress to specifically help Oregonians in your district?
Well, I would be introducing I'm a healthcare innovator. During the first part of the Affordable Care Act, the company that I represent, Democracy Health, showed a savings of 20% per annum on the delivery of healthcare services. Unfortunately, when it ended up in Washington, it was turned over to Republican and Democrat consultancy agencies. Any proposal that saved more than 15% was data breached and thrown into the wayside by the Republicans and Democrats. I would call for a constitutional convention. In my estimation, the Republicans and Democrats are criminal organizations. The number one issue in our country, greater than ISIS, greater than any social issue, is the threat that they pose to our country. So as a congressman, you only have so much leeway, but I would propose some positive solutions, and there are many out there, to some of the problems that we face, and hopefully begin a movement to get I consider the Republicans and the Democrats a disease, much like herpes in our country, and there's two types, and there are lesions across the body politic. And a citizen like myself who's trying to run for U.S. Congress against an incumbent who has already raised millions and millions of dollars, doesn't have to show up for anything. There's no representation any longer in our country. And so we have two institutions that have been there for a while, but most accelerating since the 80s and 90s. It's a very dire state of affairs. So as a congressman, perhaps I would call for a constitutional convention and maybe an indictment of the Republicans and the Democrats.
Thank you. What's your opinion about drilling, mining, logging in our national forests, wildlife refuges, parks, other public lands?
I think it's very important to have a sustainable view towards development. Once again, most of those issues I think are best done in the states, but unfortunately in our country, there can be no sustainable issue that's aligned with the interest of forests or in the environment, because in my estimation, the Republicans and the Democrats, their interest is only tied to those entities that are paying the most amount of money. For example, the United States right now is basically drowning in oil. The world is drowning in oil. The Democrat Party, who nominally supposes to be here for the environment, allowed the big drilling rig to go up to the Arctic lands. So I think, once again, the states are the better area to decide some of those interests. And once again, we must recognize that no Republican or Democrat politician is a fair, equal arbiter for any environmental or any policy, in my estimation.
Thank you. We've actually run out of time.
Okay.
And thank you for watching. This has been the Video Voters Guide. The general election is November 8th. The last day to register to vote is October 18th. Please be an informed voter. Get the information you need about candidates and about ballot measures, and remember, exercise your right to vote. It really counts. David Walker, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Great talking with you.